So the Uptake project is in fairly early stages.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. So based on your work so far, are you able to give any indications of which might be the most promising practical methods of carbon dioxide removal?
Yeah, based on the work that we are currently doing and also previous work that we have conducted, we have identified several methods that we think they are promising. Of course, nature-based solution or solutions which are more naturally elements are integrated into that are the ones that have been used before, something like afforestation, reforestation, and agricultural-based solutions. Those are the methods that we are very familiar with, and they are now currently discussed in the context of CDR also. The challenge with them is, of course, the accounting, carbon accounting and removal accounting is difficult. So that leads me to the point that the novel methods for CDR, including direct air capture and storage, DACs, and also bioenergy, uh, uh, and also carbon capture and storage integrated into bioenergy, which is BECS. These two methods, as also sometimes classified as technology-based method, they seem to be most promising in a sense that they are scalable, and also we know how to account for the captured carbon, which is the critical point in removals.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you touched on the challenges, and the main one being there, the carbon accounting.
Yeah.
What are the other challenges and barriers that are associated with widespread adoption of carbon dioxide removal methods?
Mhm. The main challenge is really about the financing this project and who is gonna pay for the removed carbon. As we know, the carbon is emitted through different industrial and agricultural processes in the economy, but we don't usually hold people who are responsible for emissions accountable for removing them. And that's why we have come to this point that we are basically trying to incentivize companies and industries who are removing the carbon from the other processes. So then we need to provide additional incentives and additional kind of financial support for them. So the question here is that who will pay for this carbon that is already in the atmosphere and being also put in the atmosphere? And that is the main challenge for all of these projects. But also there are technical challenges. For example, I mentioned direct air capture. So we know that this kind of technologies require lots of energy. And so again, providing the clean and renewable energy for them is essential, because otherwise it will defeat the purpose if we are using the fossil fuel energy to remove carbon from fossil fuel activities in the past. So we need really to think systematic about these technologies and try to use clean technology throughout the whole supply chain of this technology to make sure that the carbon which is removed is accounted for the net negative removal and not basically compensated by other emissions throughout the process. This is quite challenging. Also in the nature-based solutions, as I mentioned, we have this challenge of how to account for the removed carbon because they are based on natural processes that we don't have a good understanding of how to really account for every piece of the reaction through the chain of reactions that we have in that. There are other challenges, for example, with water-based solutions or ocean-based solutions. If they are open oceans, they touches both some legal challenges that are governing the international water bodies, and also, again, in terms of accounting for the carbon which is being removed through different geochemical and biological processes is very difficult.
All right, that's very interesting. Thank you. So I want to go on to talk about knowledge gaps in a moment, but first I'd like to ask you, we've talked about the negatives. what are the positives? What are the potential opportunities for some of these methods? How can we sort of maximize the benefits of them?
The main benefits are coming from creating basically new opportunities, economic opportunities. These are basically a new economic sector is being born now around CDR, that we know that we need this sector, these methods. If we are serious about reaching our net zero and net negative ambitions, if we are really trying to keep the temperature below the targets that we have set in the Paris Agreement and other international agreements that we have, all the science are hinting at we need some level of carbon dioxide removal. So which means that this new industry, this new economic sector needs support from the governments and from the scientific community. And with it, it will bring new opportunities in terms of also jobs, in terms of technologies, science that are being developed. But also there are co-benefits. I touched upon nature-based solutions earlier. So these are the solutions that we think uh, basically they can support both adaptation and mitigation. For example, if we are thinking about wetland restoration, peatland restoration, and technologies like that, they have co-benefits on the adaptation sector also. So they will help restoring some of the wetland and ecosystems around them, which helps the adaptation to climate change and other environmental shocks, but also provides services for carbon dioxide removal. So we think that these benefits should be highlighted more when we are thinking about CDR, and again, thinking about who should pay for the CDR. If we account for all the co-benefits that they can provide, it will help kind of push this discussion forward.
All right, that's fantastic. Let's come back and talk about incentives in a moment, because that's a very interesting area. At the present time, what are the knowledge gaps that still need to be addressed to get us to a situation from where we are now to a situation of being actually able to take advantage of those economic benefits and put things into practice?
Yeah, the main knowledge gap, I would say, is about upscaling these technologies. We know most of these technologies work in the lab or in the small scale that we have tried them. For example, direct air capture. Even now they are commercial cases for direct air capture. There are several companies around the world, in Europe and also in the US, and even we have in Africa now a direct air capture company working there. But the scale they are working is still a few tons per year. We are talking about CDR, which is needed at gigaton scale per year, which is quite a large gap between where we are now and where we should be. And this is something that basically the technology is not yet ready to that scale, and we don't know yet how to upscale these technologies. Again, thinking systematically about all the energy, all this supply chain in terms of material and skill and labor that we need, infrastructure for these projects, we are still a little bit behind, and we need more incentives and more knowledge about this part. Also about other technologies, as I mentioned, for example, ocean. Those ocean-based technologies or marine CDR in general, I think there is a huge knowledge gap in terms of the science of it. We are still in the very early stage of trying different methods to see which method work in terms of enhancing alkalinization of the water, or different way of basically increasing the capacity of the oceans and water bodies to absorb CO2. So we don't know yet many of these chemical and biological processes. So there is a knowledge gap also in that sense.
And I imagine there are significant risks associated with kind of going down any of those paths before we're really clear what the knock-on effects and the long-term impact could be, right? Right.
Yes, exactly. So the risks can be from, unintended consequences. For example, about ocean, there is a huge concern about if we are doing enhanced alkalization in the largest scale, what will be the consequence on the marine biological ecosystems around the oceans and in the oceans. About other technologies, the risks in terms of ecosystems are less, for example, afforestation, reforestation, as I said, because we have a long kind of history of doing these practices. We know more or less the risk associated with them. The novel technologies usually come with more unknowns and associated with more risk to them. But still, I think we can say overall with CDR, the risks are more or less have been identified. It is more about when you are upscaling these technologies to the level that I said, gigaton levels, then it comes with, for example, socioeconomic and distributional risks. So who will benefit more about them? Who will lose in a sense that if these technologies are developed? Because there are some concerns that some interest groups may put basically investment into these technologies and then take control of these technologies in the future. And then some group of societies and communities will be left out of the advancement of these technologies. So those are the social risks that we are also concerned about. There are also legal risks. I touched upon them. About the ocean, for example, I mentioned, because we have international conventions and regulations governing the oceans, and that might be also intervening with the development of ocean-based solutions. About land-based solutions or technology-based solutions, there might be also different legal risk about basically if the captured and removed carbons can be sold domestically or internationally, under which kind of framework and so on. So there are legal and political risks also associated with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. So you've mentioned incentives a few times. I want to come back and ask you, about the work that you're doing to address the knowledge gaps. But first, tell me a bit more about what kind of incentives we need. What should policymakers be looking to
Mhm.
put in place to try and drive these technologies forward?
The main incentive is really about pricing the carbon. We need a carbon market, a real carbon market, a competitive carbon market for these technologies to flourish and grow. Currently, within the EU context, of course, we have ETS, but it is not very clear, and even some people seriously doubt about integrating CDR into the ETS market. So we are thinking about maybe we need a separate market for removal, not the ETS, the current ETS system. So either ETS or any other kind of market needs to be created or developed or further integrated into that account for this removed carbon. Currently, we don't have that. Most CDR technologies rely on either voluntary carbon markets, so which are like enterprises and companies who willing to spend some money on offsetting their carbon footprint, and through that, some of these carbon removal technologies have come to basically address those needs. But also some governments are spending some money just to try to see if these technologies are viable and they can basically scale up in the future. But we don't have a coordinated effort yet at any scale, either at the European level or at the broader international level, to kind of concentrate on CDR as a method for removing carbon and try to basically channel funding through different mechanisms to this technology. So these are, I think this is the main incentive which is missing, basically trying to establish a carbon market for CDR technologies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot more international collaboration, as you've
Exactly.
said, right?
Yes.
And how can governments, so we need that carbon market in place, we need more international collaboration. What else can governments do, policymakers do to to help us move forward with these
Mhm.
technologies, but also safeguard against the potential risks and the unintended consequences that they could have?
Yeah, it needs to, I think the main thing needs to be created is also a governing body for these technologies. We need to have, as you mentioned, safeguards for these technologies. And for that, we need a scientific body or regulatory body who can tell us which of these technologies and how they can remove the carbon. Because lots of these technologies that are being developed, the developers can claim a certain amount of carbon being removed, but it needs to be tested and certified. So at the EU level, currently there are many good initiatives are underway for certification, developing a certification framework for these technologies, which is very promising and very good sign for these technologies. But also, I think at the national level, we need better coordination among the national government. If we are talking about the EU governments, for example, member states needs each of them to develop their own kind of regulatory body to evaluate different technologies. Because when we are talking about CDR, it is not really one technology. It's a portfolio of many, many different technologies. And we don't, as I said, they are in different stage of development in terms of science and technology also. So we need to understand which one works, and if they work, how can we make sure that the amount of removal that they claim is correct and really they are removing that amount. So that needs some serious regulation in that sense. So that's I think based on the research that we are doing also in this project, there is a need for a strong scientific and regulatory body to govern these technologies.
All right, wonderful, thank you. So part of your work involves working with different stakeholders to sort of learn about the development and deployment of these technologies. What stakeholders are you working with, and how are they contributing to your knowledge and to moving this forward?
Mm. We have identified 4 groups of stakeholders for our project. One is the governments and policymaker, one is businesses and developers of the technology, one is the scientific community, and one is the civil society in general. So each of these groups have played a critical role in providing some input for our research so far, and we are counting on them to continuously engage them in our project and get more feedback from them, and also provide our results and our fundings to them to see through some kind of co-creation and co-design of the project if we can achieve our goals. So to tell you more specifically, for example, governments and policymakers, our project through our different members of the project, members of the consortium, we are involved in different level of policy making, directly or indirectly. We have from the DG Klima, we have some representatives in our advisory board of the project. And also, as I mentioned, some of our members are involved in the national policy making and also at the international, for example, in the IPCC. Some of our members are currently actively participating in the discussions in the IPCC meetings. Uh, from the business side, for example, we are holding workshops every year when we have our annual meeting. We invite several companies who are interested to come and provide their input to us. It also helps us in terms of scientific work that we are doing to see that which part of the scientific research that we see in the literature and we are working on is now gonna be practiced in real world and bear some fruit in the real world. In terms of civil society also, we have some members in our advisory board, and also we try to hear their concern. I think this is a part that we are very interested in basically hearing the input from this group of stakeholders, because in terms of equity and justice, I think this is something we want to avoid. Having developed a technology that later on we realize that it is the benefit of the technology is not evenly distributed in the society, and there are losers and winners in this kind of development. We want to be conscious about that. So we have started engaging this group from the early on to understand their concern. And I think some of the concerns are definitely very valid about the risk of this technology. For example, as I mentioned earlier about water-based technologies, marine technologies, civil society has played a very active role in highlighting some of the risks that they may have on the ecosystems, and we have taken them into account when we are thinking about these technologies. And of course, the last group, the scientific group, is the one that we are kind of representing ourselves also. We belong to this group, and we provide our research and results available to all the researchers in the field. Of course, we publish all the papers publicly, and we invite everybody to communicate and interact with this result. We have started also a webinar series, a monthly webinar series, UPTAKE monthly webinar series, that we highlight the publications of coming out of our project, and we open the discussion. We invite a stakeholder who can talk about the topic of this paper and then interact with the authors of the paper, and we open it for Q&A and interactive session with the audience of this webinar. The webinars are totally public, and anybody can join and also start question and kind of discuss the topic with the authors and the experts in the field.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's sort of open source collaboration. So you mentioned businesses a few times. You mentioned the concerns of civil society stakeholders. What are some of the concerns that businesses have expressed to you?
The main concern that we hear from the businesses is this lack of support from the government in terms of uncertainties that they are facing. I think any business, any serious business owner and also investor wants to have some level of security about their investment and about the prospect of the technology they are developing. And currently we are lacking that. It is not very clear that CDR technologies will be in the future of any kind of climate negotiations or climate policy making within Europe. As I mentioned, there are very good signs that we see coming out of the EU regulations in terms of certification, in terms of regulation. But still, I think what we hear from business is that they want to see faster and more clear communication from the EU Commission and also from the member state governments to businesses that these technologies are gonna stay and they're gonna basically develop further in the future. There is still a lack of incentive also financially because we don't have the market yet for the carbon removal. So this developing basically these technologies, commercial development of these technologies heavily depend on government kind of support in terms of subsidies, or if the governments can provide some kind of incentive for buying this removal, basically credits from the companies or no. So these are the issues that companies are currently concerned about. But I should also say that because we heard this last time we had this kind of workshop with the businesses, I heard several times the danger of over-regulation. So the companies are also afraid of basically EU Commission and then the national level regulations putting and tying their hands too early in the development of these technologies. So we need a balanced approach. We need some guarantee and security for these businesses to understand that the future is kind of certain for development of their technologies, but at the same time, we need to be aware of this over-regulation problem that in general we have in the EU and the discussions around that.
Yeah, it's yeah, the dangers are sort of going too far in one direction, right?
Yes.
So obviously for all these stakeholder groups, transparency and trust is going to be fundamental, right? In sort of long-term uptake. How can, how can governments, how can the research community ensure that sort of transparency about the development, the monitoring, the reporting around carbon dioxide removal methods?
Yeah, that is a main one of the main issues also, the developing a very transparent MRV framework for these technologies. We are working on this. This is part of the project. It hasn't been developed that much yet, as I mentioned, because we are in the earliest stage of these technologies. But we have recognized that this is a big part of the discussion around the technologies. We are aware of some international efforts going on. We think the best approach is international collaboration on that. We think any MRV framework that is gonna be uh, basically become established as a gold standard for these technologies need to be developed through international collaboration. So we think it shouldn't be the job of one single country or industry to develop the MRV framework. It should be international and it should be very transparent. So to hear all the perspective of different stakeholders, and we think it should be relied on the latest development in terms of science and technology. We know that, for example, in terms of satellite basically observation and also different methods with machine learning and AI now. Uh, Lots of new capacities have been developed for accounting, carbon accounting, and we think these kind of new technologies and methods should be integrated into any MRV frameworks that are being developed for CDR technologies.
All right, wonderful. So we've talked about what the project is doing, what Uptake is doing in terms of engaging stakeholders. Can you tell me a bit more about, your work in general? What are you doing to bridge those knowledge gaps and address the barriers that we talked about at the beginning?
Yeah, so what we are doing now is we are reaching out to different, not only stakeholders, but also different sources of information and knowledge about different technology. So instead of picking one specific technology and just focusing on one technology, we are taking a very neutral approach towards the different CDR technologies. So this first step, I think, is very important. So CDR technologies are not yet at the level that we know which one will be the golden kind of opportunity for the future of removal. So at this earliest stage, we need to be open-minded about all technologies. So one of the principles we have established is that we are considering all technologies, all available technologies. We are doing a deep dive into the literature and trying to understand what are the current state of knowledge within the literature about every technology. Then we are reaching out to different experts and conducting kind of expert interviews and elicitation to understand different perspective about the technologies, different shortcomings of technologies and promises that the technologies hold. And also we are working together not only with the team that we have within Uptake, but also with external partner outside the project. The core of our project is modeling. So we are developing these integrated assessment models that include not only the technology and the techno-economic assessment of the technology, but also energy system and all other parts of the economy that needs to work together to upscale these technologies. So in that sense, we are not only relying on the European teams who have developed very well these kind of models, but we have partners in other parts of the world. For example, we have US partners helping us with their model, and we are trying to compare different models and see the outcome of each model and how we can basically consolidate the result into a single narrative that help the policymaker advance the CDR uh, knowledge and also policy framework for that.
All right. And what are your most critical research priorities as the project advances, for the next year, 2 years or so?
The most critical part is trying to get everybody from different community together. I think, as I mentioned, our project is pretty broad in terms of technology, and we have realized that we are talking to different communities, like community of people who are working on ocean-based solution or marine CDR are very different from people who are talking about direct air capture, for example, or people who are working on nature-based solution. So finding the common language that brings these people together and work together toward the same goal, I think that is the most critical point for our project in the coming years. And we are trying to basically make sure that we hear all the voices that are available to us in this sense, in the science and technology, and then provide, as I said, kind of consistent narrative for the policymakers. So we don't want to confuse or to add to the confusion of the policymakers and provide a very non-coherent kind of message to them. So that is the big challenge for us, but it will come pretty late into the project when we are developing basically the policy narratives of our work.
All right, wonderful. And how are you feeling about things so far? Are you feeling sort of positive about how it's going, how the work is progressing?
Yes, very positive about it. I'm very uh, hopeful about the future and prospect of these technologies. When we started about 2 years ago, just discussing the idea of this proposal and then later on submission, I can say even in these 2 years, the amount of attention to CDR and the progress in terms of science and technology has been nothing short of something like AI, I would say, in the climate change domain, of course. CDR is a big thing and has become a big theme within the climate change community. And this makes our project one of the most important projects, not only for our kind of institute that is involved, but also all the other partners who are working. And we hear from them that CDR has become one of the main part of their basically portfolio of research portfolio that they are doing. So I'm very hopeful. I think we see lots of good signs in science and technology about CDR. A little bit less on the policy side. So I hope that the policy also tries to accelerate and be on the same pace as the science. So in that case, if it happens, then I think we will see very good results coming out of this project and broader CDR kind of research.
All right, so you're really in the right place at the right time then.
Yes, we definitely feel like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. I think we all need a bit of positivity at the moment, don't we? And to keep us going. All right, that's wonderful. So those are all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Anything that, a message you want to convey that we haven't touched upon?
I just want to say that what we hear a lot in recent months after, let's say, the US election and what has happened in the US is a little bit of disappointment in the climate change community in general because of what is happening in the world now and geopolitically. But I want to highlight, as we started this conversation, on the positive note about CDR. I think CDR in general is providing new opportunities for the society, for the economy, for the societal development, and thinking about its benefit, not only in terms of climate services that it provides and help us reach the net zero and net negative solution, but also providing new opportunities for the EU. Let's talk about EU, for example, in this context, developing a native technology within the EU where we can control all the supply chain, where we know all the risk, and we can basically make sure it creates the jobs and it creates economics benefits to the society in addition to the environmental and climate services that it is intended to. So I think that is the most promising way to look at these technologies. And I hope the policymakers also look at this as an opportunity for the EU to be leading these technologies and be a leader in terms of the climate, reaching the climate goals, but also helping its economy to strive and grow.
Yeah, I think that once there's a strong business case, then these things just gather momentum on their own, don't they? All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me. This has been a really interesting, insightful, and quite inspiring conversation. I really enjoyed hearing about your work and what you're doing with carbon dioxide removal.